Imagine a world where you could choose your money just like you choose your brand of coffee. You'd have all these competing currencies, each one fighting to prove it's the most stable, the most trustworthy. Sounds pretty crazy, right? Well, not for the economist Friedrich Hayek. Actually, he argued it was the only way to protect our wealth from the constant grind of inflation and government control. So today, we're diving deep into his radical proposal, the denationalization of money.
Okay, so here's the game plan. First, we're going to look at the big problem Hayek saw with the government having a total monopoly on money. Then, we'll unpack his wild proposal for a free market of competing currencies. After that, we'll get into why this idea was so revolutionary, even for his own camp. And finally, we'll trace its legacy, from the critics and champions all the way to, you guessed it, the world of crypto. All right, so to really get a grip on Hayek's solution, we first have to understand the problem he was so desperately trying to solve, and that is the government's absolute total control over the money we all use every single day. Hayek had a pretty grim answer to this question. He basically argued that if you look at history, it's just one long story of inflation. And this inflation, it isn't some accident of nature. He was convinced it's almost always engineered by governments to serve their own interests, funding wars, paying for huge projects, or just covering their debts without having to send you a bigger tax bill.
And look, this isn't just some abstract theory. Hayek put the receipts right in his book. This table shows the hard numbers, and they are brutal. Just look at this. Between 1950 and 1975, the money in Chile lost over 99% of its value. 99%. Even in places like the UK and the US, the drop was staggering. For Hayek, this was Exhibit A, the ultimate proof that government money monopolies just don't work.
And Hayek wasn't the first person to call this out, not by a long shot. He actually went all the way back to Adam Smith to prove that this is a really, really old problem. The logic is simple. Whenever you give one single entity the power to create money, the temptation to mess with it for their own gain is just overwhelming. It doesn't matter if you're a medieval king clipping coins or a modern central bank firing up the printing presses. So, how did Hayek propose to fix this centuries-old problem? Well, he didn't suggest a new rule or a better committee. In his 1976 book, Denationalisation of Money, he proposed something much more radical: getting government out of the money business entirely. His big idea was this stunningly direct, three-step process. Step 1. You just abolish the government's monopoly. Simple as that. Step 2. You let private companies, banks, financial institutions, whoever, issue their own branded currencies. And then Step 3, the most important part. You let the people decide. Let the market figure it out. We'd all be free to use, accept, or reject any of these currencies based on one simple question. Which one can I actually trust? Now, the first thing everybody says when they hear this is, wait a minute, what about Gresham's law? The old saying, bad money drives out good? The idea is that if you have a real gold coin and a fake debased one, people will hoard the good one and spend the bad one as fast as they can. So wouldn't a free market for money just turn into a race to the bottom?
Hayek's answer to this was a huge no. And he pointed to this one critical tiny detail that almost everyone forgets about Gresham's law. It only works when the government forces everyone to accept the good money and the bad money at the same fixed value. It's the legal command that says, this junky coin is worth the same as this pure gold one.
So here's the kicker. You take away that fixed government-mandated exchange rate and let the currencies float freely against each other, and the whole thing flips on its head. The exact opposite happens. People would be scrabbling to get rid of any currency that's losing value and desperate to hold on to the one that's stable. In a truly competitive market, good money would actually drive out the bad.
And this quote just nails his core belief. He had zero faith in the good intentions of government officials to give us sound money. Instead, he put his trust in the simple self-interest of a private business. Think about it. A bank that prints too much and wrecks its own currency's value, it's going to lose all its customers and go broke. The profit motive itself would be the best guarantee of stability. So just how radical was this idea? Well, let's just say it wasn't just a challenge to the mainstream economists. This was like a bombshell inside his own camp, the Austrian school, which was famous for loving hard money.
And this slide makes the divide crystal clear. See, his peers, guys like Ludwig von Mises and Murray Rothbard, they were all about the gold standard. Their whole goal was to chain the government to gold, to restrain it. But Hayek, he took it a giant leap further.
He didn't want to just put the monopoly in a golden cage. He wanted to get rid of the monopoly altogether. He believed true competition, not a shiny medal, was the only way we'd ever discover the best money.
As you can probably guess, no government on Earth exactly jumped at the chance to give up one of its biggest powers. But Hayek's idea didn't just fade away. It planted a seed, it sparked a movement, and you could argue its influence is bigger today than it ever was when he was alive.
Now, the idea was met with a ton of skepticism. I mean, even another free market legend, Milton Friedman, wasn't fully on board. He basically said, look, it's a neat idea in theory, but we have absolutely no proof that competition would actually lead to stability. And other critics worried it would just be total chaos, with normal people having to juggle a dozen different currencies just to buy groceries.
But despite all the critics, Hayek's book lit a fire under the whole hard money and libertarian movement. This timeline kind of shows you the journey. It really kicks off in '71, when Nixon slams the gold window shut, creating the very crisis Hayek was thinking about. His book drops in '76. By '81, his followers are actually forcing a debate about this stuff in the US government. And then, in 2009, something Hayek could have never, ever predicted happens. Bitcoin arrives.
And you can really see his legacy branching off in two different directions. On one hand, you have things like the US gold coin. This was a direct result of that hard money movement pushing for a tangible alternative to paper money that people could hold themselves. But on the other hand, you have the idea itself, living on, spreading, and eventually providing the intellectual framework for a completely new, digital, and far more radical experiment.
And that really brings us to the big question, doesn't it? Hayek's dream was a marketplace for money, where stability is rewarded and inflation gets punished by the consumer. Whether that competition happens with privately printed banknotes, like he imagined, or with lines of code on a global decentralized network, well, that's a fascinating thought. The debate he kicked off is more alive today than ever before. So what do you think? Would Hayek have been a Bitcoiner?